The phone buzzed against the hard oak of the kitchen table. Once, twice. The sharp vibration cut straight through the low, steady hum of the dishwasher, running its final drying cycle. I picked up the device. An unknown number glared back from the screen in harsh white light. The image attached to the message loaded slowly over the weak internet connection. A man slept under a white comforter pulled up to his chest. His face looked completely relaxed. It was a face he never wore at home. It was the face of a man who did not have to pretend to be the perfect father or the perfect boss. A bare gray wall and an industrial pendant light framed the background. I zoomed in on the bottom corner of the photo. A small brown dog lay curled at the foot of the bed. Doug claimed he was allergic to dogs. He had told me that for 19 years. A text message appeared beneath the picture a second later. "I hate to cause you heartache, but if his heart is no longer at home, won't you just let him come to me?" I read the words twice. I did not cry. My jaw ached from grinding my teeth. I analyzed the tone instead. The person who typed those words wanted me to break. They wanted me to call Doug in the middle of the night. They wanted me to scream and throw plates so he would see an unstable wife and run straight back to that gray bedroom. I knew the tactic perfectly. I had read 3 different books on the subject over the past 3 weeks. I looked at the photo one more time. I did not look at my husband. I looked at the dog. The tiny brown animal slept peacefully. This was a normal night for the dog. Doug had been sleeping in that bed long enough for the animal to get used to his smell. He had been there long enough for the dog to ignore the soft snoring I had known for almost 2 decades. My left hand twisted the gold band on my ring finger. The metal felt cold against my skin. I took a screenshot of the message. I opened my email and attached the image. I typed a quick note to Sharon Mead. She was the attorney I had hired 18 days ago. I wrote that the mistress had made direct contact and we now had a phone number to trace. I hit send. Then I turned my attention back to the laptop glowing in front of me. 2 pages of bank transfers glowed in yellow highlight. I added a new row to the spreadsheet. I typed in the new information. The dishwasher clicked and fell completely silent. The heavy thud of the garage door echoed through the floorboards a moment later. Doug was home. I closed the laptop. I carried my cold mug to the sink and rinsed away the bitter coffee. I walked upstairs and slipped into bed exactly 4 minutes before he entered the room. I closed my eyes and steadied my breathing. I am 48 years old. I manage a credit union branch downtown. My days revolve around interest rates, risk assessment, and precise numbers. 3 weeks ago, I applied that same clinical assessment to my own marriage. I had been auditing our joint accounts. It was a routine I maintained every single month. That was when I found the recurring transfers. $400 sent every 2 weeks to an account under the name K. Novak. The pattern stretched back 5 full months. A quick search brought up her professional profile immediately. Kira Novak worked as a sales manager at the second car dealership my husband owned. Her photos showed a young and confident woman smiling brightly. I had called my best friend Bess the second I saw the profile. We met at our usual coffee shop. Bess worked as a paralegal at a busy family law firm. She did not offer me pity. She slid a napkin across the table and told me to get a lawyer before I said a single word to Doug. I kept quiet. I even kept quiet when I remembered the sapphire ring my mother had left me. Doug had taken it to a jeweler 2 months ago. He claimed the setting needed to be tightened. He had not brought it back. I pushed the thought away at the time. The kitchen clock read 47 minutes past 6 the next morning. The garage door opened. Heavy footsteps crossed the hardwood floor. I stood at the counter and poured dark roast coffee into 2 ceramic mugs. I added a splash of cream to his cup. My hands did not shake. My expression remained entirely blank. A spreadsheet of calculations ran endlessly in my mind. Doug walked into the kitchen. A strange, sweet cologne trailed behind him. He had started wearing it 4 months ago, and called it a free sample from a wealthy client. Now, I knew the exact brand. I had seen the blue glass bottle sitting on a nightstand in one of Kira's social media posts. He complained about traffic on the bridge and a double shift at the dealership. Then he leaned in and kissed my forehead. The movement was quick and automatic. It felt like he was checking a box on a list of daily chores. That kiss changed everything. It was not the text message or the bank transfers. It was the absolute ownership in his lips. He had been in another woman's bed just 6 hours ago. Yet he kissed me to say that I was still exactly where he left me. He believed I would never cause a scene. He sat down and drank his coffee. He checked his phone. His thumb deliberately covered the screen. He tilted the device away from me. 4 months ago, his phone always sat face up on the table. Now it lived in his pocket or face down on the counter. He asked if our daughter Sage had a game that afternoon. He did not even look up from his screen when he spoke. I told him her game was on Saturday at 2 o'clock. He nodded and said he might be late because of a vendor meeting. I watched him eat his toast. He felt no remorse because he did not think he was doing anything wrong. He had placed a massive bet on my predictable nature. He knew I valued stability. For 3 weeks, his bet had paid off. He rinsed his mug and kissed my forehead one more time. He promised to be home early and walked out the door. The house fell silent. I stood alone in the kitchen. I did not open my spreadsheet. I opened a new email to Sharon. I typed the subject line asking for the timeline to file the divorce papers. The collection phase was over. The war had officially started. I looked at the mug he had left behind. I had poured 2 cups of coffee every morning for 19 years. Today was the last time. I met Bess for lunch at a diner downtown later that Friday. I handed her my phone. She read the message from Kira, and her eyes lit up. Bess viewed the world through the lens of a paralegal. She declared the text a massive mistake on the mistress's part. It proved direct aggression and awareness. It was perfect for the case. But the law was not my primary concern. I thought about my 16-year-old daughter. I told Bess that Sage would find out eventually. Portland was not a large city. People talked in the grocery store aisles and at the country club. Bess took a sip of her black coffee. She set the mug down hard against the table. She told me Sage would find out no matter what I did. The only question was which version of the story my daughter would hear. She could watch her mother control the narrative. Or she could hear her father spin his own version to the entire community first. I nodded slowly. The logic made perfect sense. But when I walked back to my car, I sat in the driver's seat for 3 full minutes before turning the key. My thumb rubbed the smooth gold of my wedding band. I had made my choice. I was ready to dismantle his perfect image, but I would soon discover that Doug had stolen much more than my marriage. He had taken the one thing I promised to protect forever. I took a personal day from the credit union on Monday morning. I drove out to the second Ford dealership and parked my car in the public lot directly across the street. This was my very first deliberate action since finding the bank statements. I sat in the driver's seat for a full hour, with the engine turned completely off. Through the massive glass windows of the brightly lit showroom, I watched Kira. She looked so much younger in her social media pictures. In person, she was just an ordinary woman in a black blazer and sensible heels pacing the tile floor. Then Doug walked out of his glass office. He stopped right next to her. Kira reached out and touched his arm. The gesture was light and familiar and completely natural. Doug lit up. It was the exact smile he used on important clients when he wanted them to feel heard and valued. He tilted his head down just a fraction to listen to her speak. Kira was not his employee in that moment. She was his audience. My chest tightened against the steering wheel. I realized I was not jealous of her youth or her tailored clothes. I was mourning that specific smile. 19 years ago, Doug used to look at me the exact same way. I could not remember the day he stopped doing it. The warmth had receded like a slow ocean tide over the years, and I only noticed it was completely gone when I saw him give it to someone else. I started the engine and pulled out of the parking lot. I called Sharon on the drive home. I told my lawyer I wanted to file the divorce papers as soon as humanly possible. Bess asked me to come to her house 2 nights later. She handed me a thick manila folder across her kitchen counter. The first item inside was a thick paper booklet. It was the Ford Franchise Employee Handbook. Bess had kept a copy from a previous corporate legal case. She told me to turn to page 47. The text clearly stated that romantic relationships between supervisory employees and their direct reports were strictly prohibited. The penalty for violating the policy was the immediate termination of the franchise agreement. Kira reported directly to Doug. The second item in the folder made the kitchen spin. It was a preliminary financial report from the law firm. Doug had attempted to take out a second mortgage on our family home for $200,000. The bank had flagged the application immediately because my name was also on the property title. I had stopped the process before it went through, but the intention remained printed on the page. She told me he planned to pull $200,000 out of the house we built together just to buy a condominium for that woman. I sat in complete silence, staring at the numbers. Bess asked me what I was thinking about. I told her I was calculating exactly how long I had been incredibly stupid. Bess reached across the table and grabbed my hand. She rarely initiated physical contact with anyone. She told me I was not stupid for trusting my husband of 19 years. She had walked this exact same road 6 years ago, and she knew the vast difference between being a fool and being a loyal partner. I looked down at my right hand. I told Bess I had called the local jeweler that morning about my mother and her antique sapphire ring. The shop owner checked his records and told me there was no repair order under the name Doug Pratt. The ring had never been dropped off at the store. Bess did not say a word. We both knew exactly what that meant, but neither of us wanted to say the words out loud. I felt a strange sense of victory 2 weeks later, sitting in the quiet office of my attorney. The evidence lined up perfectly in neat stacks on her mahogany desk. We had 5 months of bank transfers totaling nearly $5,000. We had a joint credit card I never knew existed, with $47,000 in hidden charges for luxury hotels and expensive dinners. He had even purchased a diamond necklace from Tiffany that I never received. The blocked mortgage application sat on top of the pile as the final piece of leverage. Sharon assured me the legal case was incredibly solid and the financial distribution would lean heavily in my favor. I drove home feeling completely in control of my future. The house smelled like roasted vegetables and seared steak when I walked through the front door. Doug stood in the kitchen pouring red wine into 2 crystal glasses. 2 expensive candles burned brightly on the dining room table. He smiled at me warmly. The affection radiated from his face, but I recognized the sheer panic hiding just behind his eyes. Kira was pushing him for more commitment. I had seen her text message. Doug felt his control slipping, and he was retreating to his safe wife to repair his image. He pulled out my chair and handed me a glass of wine. He asked if I remembered the very first time he cooked dinner for me in our old apartment on Hawthorne Avenue. I took a sip of water and told him he burned the fish. He laughed softly. He said he burned the fish and set off the building smoke alarm, but I stayed with him anyway. I agreed that I stayed. A long and heavy silence stretched across the dining table. Doug reached out and held my hand. His eyes pooled with genuine tears. He told me he knew he was not always an easy man to live with, but he truly loved our life together. He loved our family. He was not acting. The terrifying truth was that Doug truly loved this house and his community, standing and having his coffee made perfectly for him every morning. He wanted to keep both of his lives spinning at the exact same time, and the deepest part of my heart desperately wanted to believe him. A small voice inside my head wanted to drop the legal folders and go back to our normal Thursday nights together. Then I looked down at my hands resting on the table. My left hand wore his gold wedding band. My right hand was completely bare. My mother had given me her sapphire ring the night she died in her hospital bed. Doug had taken it from my jewelry box 2 months ago to give to someone else. No amount of perfectly cooked steak or crying would ever bring it back. I thanked him for the dinner. I washed my dishes at the sink and walked upstairs without shedding a single tear. I stood in the bathroom and stared at the mirror above the sink. I saw the face of Helen Lindsay staring back at me. My mother had stayed in a fine marriage for 38 years without ever complaining or asking for anything more. I turned off the bathroom light. I refused to let her silent endurance become my legacy. The automatic doors of the credit union slid open the following Tuesday afternoon. I heard the sharp click of heels against the tile floor before I even looked up from my computer monitor. The smell of sweet vanilla perfume reached my desk a second later. It was the exact scent that lingered on my husband every Thursday night. Kira Novak walked straight toward me. The afternoon sun caught her bright blonde highlights. She wore a tailored black blazer and a bright customer service smile. She stood directly in front of my desk and said she wanted to open a checking account. She bypassed the reception desk entirely. She asked the teller for the branch manager. She wanted me to know exactly who she was. She wanted to prove she was not afraid of me. I pulled a blank form from my top drawer. I kept my voice perfectly flat and asked for her full legal name. She proudly stated her name for the record. I asked for her current address. She recited the exact apartment number I had memorized from the bank statements a month ago. I asked for her occupation. She paused and smiled slightly before declaring herself a sales manager at Pratt Ford. She held my gaze, waiting for me to react. I simply asked if she preferred direct deposit or a cash opening balance. I processed the paperwork efficiently and printed her final receipt. I slid the white paper across the desk. Kira reached out to sign the document. The silver band caught the overhead fluorescent lights. A dark blue sapphire rested heavily on her right ring finger. The silver setting was worn smooth around the edges. I knew the letters H and L were engraved on the inside of that band. The entire building went completely silent. I could see the receipt printer spinning and the tellers talking at the next window, but I heard absolutely nothing. Doug had not just betrayed our marriage. He had taken the only piece of my mother I had left in the world. She emphasized my last name just to make sure the insult landed. Then she turned and walked away. I sat frozen in my chair. I looked at the empty space on my right hand. My left thumb brushed against my gold wedding band. I slipped the ring off my finger. I opened the bottom drawer of my desk and dropped the metal band inside. I pushed the heavy drawer shut. My coworker walked over and asked if I was feeling all right because my face had gone completely pale. I told her I was perfectly fine and called for the next customer in line. The battle was no longer about money or infidelity. I was fighting for my mother. The front door of our house slammed shut late Friday evening. Doug marched straight into the living room. His face was flushed bright red and his tie hung loose around his neck. He smelled of stale beer and nervous sweat. Someone down at the county courthouse had tipped him off about the divorce filing. The bright living room lights illuminated the raw fury in his eyes. The beloved community sponsor was entirely gone. He waved his phone in the air and demanded to know why I filed legal papers without speaking to him first. I remained seated on the sofa with my book resting on my lap. I asked him what he wanted me to say. He paced across the rug. He yelled that adults talked about their problems instead of sneaking around behind each other to hire lawyers. I asked him if sneaking around was similar to sleeping with an employee for 7 straight months. Doug stopped pacing immediately. He stared at me in absolute shock. He demanded to know who told me. I explained that his mistress had sent me a message. She sent a photo of him sleeping in her bed with a little brown dog resting by his feet. I pointed out that he had claimed a severe allergy to dogs since the day we got married. Doug collapsed into the armchair. His hands shook violently. He cried and swore it meant nothing and promised it was only a one-time mistake. I reached into my bag and placed the printed photograph on the coffee table. I pointed to the animal. I told him a man with a severe dog allergy does not sleep in a house with a dog unless he has been spending the night there for months. He shifted his tactic. He bargained. He promised to fire Kira first thing Monday morning. He offered to sell the entire dealership if that was what it took to fix our marriage. I remained completely silent. Then the anger returned. He asked if I had thought about our daughter. He asked how the church community and our local friends would react to a massive public scandal. He accused me of destroying our perfect family. He was turning himself into the victim. He wanted me to believe I was the one breaking our home apart. And the terrifying part was that he truly believed his own tears. He was crying because he feared losing his pristine public reputation much more than he feared losing his wife. Soft footsteps sounded on the stairs. Sage stood in the doorway. Her eyes were red and swollen. She gripped her phone tightly in her hand. She told us she already knew everything. A girl from her high school had texted her the rumors. The entire town knew before she did. Doug stood up and walked toward her. He begged his daughter to let him explain the situation. Sage looked at her father. Then she looked at me. She asked why we were still standing in this house. She turned around and walked back upstairs. Her bedroom door clicked shut. Doug buried his face in his hands. I picked the photograph up from the table and put it back in my bag. I walked up the stairs and knocked softly on my daughter's door. I asked her to let me in. The silence radiating from the living room below felt heavier than lead. 2 nights later, I found myself sitting in my car in the empty parking lot of the credit union. The cold rain pounded against the metal roof. Pale orange light from the street lamps reflected off the wet asphalt. I smelled the damp leather of the old car seats. Doug was staying in the guest bedroom at home and texting his lawyer and his pastor endlessly. I could not be in that house with him. I could not go to Bess either because she would demand a strict action plan. I stared through the rain at the glass doors of the bank. My name was printed in gold lettering on the window. Joanne Pratt, branch manager. I had carried that last name for 19 years. It was printed on my credit cards and my mortgage documents and my mail. When my co-workers introduced me at banking conventions, they called me Joe Pratt. When Sage brought her field hockey permission forms home, I signed them as a Pratt. I could not remember the last time anyone called me Joanne Lindsay. My mother had died as Helen Lindsay. She never changed her name when she married my father. She told me a name was a gift, and she intended to keep hers forever. I was 29 years old when I told her I wanted to share a name with my new husband. She had handed me the blue sapphire ring and told me to keep it so I would never forget my real name. Tears finally broke through. I rested my forehead against the steering wheel and wept into the dark. I did not cry over my broken marriage or the younger woman. I cried for my mother. She knew I would disappear into my husband and his towering reputation. The ring was supposed to be my anchor, and I had let him take it away from me. I lifted my head and wiped my face with the sleeve of my sweater. I looked at the gold letters on the bank window one last time. I was not going to punish Doug for the money or the affair. I was going to reclaim Joanne Lindsay. I was going to take back the ring and the woman I used to be. The desire for bitter revenge vanished entirely. I needed my identity back. I started the engine and put the car in drive. I was going home for my daughter. I knew exactly what I was going to tell my lawyer in the morning. I was done plotting a war. I was ready to secure my freedom. I sat across from my attorney and my best friend the following Wednesday morning. The heavy mahogany desk felt different today. I did not want a war anymore. I outlined my new terms to Sharon. I wanted a clean extraction. I asked for the house to be refinanced solely under my name. I requested a fair split of the dealership equity. I wanted joint custody so Sage could decide exactly when she wanted to see her father. And I had one strictly non-negotiable demand. I wanted my mother's blue sapphire ring returned to my right hand. Sharon adjusted her glasses and explained that the ring was legally considered separate property. She said Doug had absolutely no right to take a family heirloom. I told her I knew the law, but the ring was currently sitting on the right hand of Kira Novak, and I wanted it back. Bess crossed her arms tightly over her chest. She stared at me in absolute frustration. She reminded me that I could take so much more from him. She pointed to the thick folder of financial evidence and the fraudulent mortgage application. She wanted me to burn his reputation to the ground. I looked my friend directly in the eyes. I told her I refused to spend the next 2 years of my life living inside the mind of Doug Pratt. I wanted to be completely done with him. Bess sat in silence for a long time. Finally, she uncrossed her arms. She told me to at least let him know I held the power to destroy him. She wanted me to show him the loaded gun and then choose to walk away. She said that was what true power looked like. I nodded. That was exactly what I planned to do. I walked through the double doors of the main Ford dealership at 9 o'clock the following Monday morning. It was the very first time in 19 years I had entered the building without attending a company holiday party or picking up my husband for an event. The showroom smelled intensely of new plastic artificial pine air freshener and harsh carpet cleaner. The morning news played at a low volume on the television in the waiting area. The sales floor fell quiet as I walked past the reception desk. I was wearing a pair of bright red leather boots. Doug had called them an interesting choice back in 2017, and I had shoved them into the back of my closet ever since. This morning, they were the only shoes that felt right. Doug sat behind the glass walls of his corner office. I opened his door, stepped inside, and pushed the heavy glass shut behind me. He looked up from his computer. His face shifted rapidly. He was calculating the damage. He was trying to figure out exactly how much he needed to offer to keep me quiet. I did not sit down. I opened my manila folder and placed 3 items perfectly flat on his desk. First, I laid down the financial report. I had highlighted the $47,000 in hotel charges and the blocked $200,000 mortgage application in bright red ink. Second, I placed the corporate employee handbook on the wood surface, a yellow sticky note marked page 47. Third, I set down the printed photograph from Kira's social media page. The blue glass cologne bottle sat next to a book on her nightstand. I placed the text message he had sent me 4 months ago, right beside it. The message where he claimed the cologne was a free sample from a wealthy client. I looked down at him. I kept my voice perfectly steady. I told him he would receive the final settlement agreement from my lawyer this afternoon. I gave him exactly 7 days to sign the papers. I promised that if he signed, these 3 items would stay hidden inside my folder forever. He told me I did not need to threaten him. He told me to just say what I wanted. I leaned forward slightly. I told him the corporate office would receive the handbook violation along with his human resources file. I mentioned the phrase franchise review. All the color drained from his face. I told him the bank would receive a formal fraud report regarding the forged signature on the mortgage application. Doug pressed his hands flat against the desk. His knuckles turned completely white. I told him I did not even need to mention the local community. I said he already knew exactly what would happen there. A heavy silence filled the office. Doug stared at the folder. Then he stared at me. He finally asked how much money I wanted. I told him I wanted the house. I wanted my fair share of the business. I wanted Sage to make her own choices. And I wanted my mother's ring. Doug flinched hard. His shoulders jerked back against his leather chair. It was the exact moment he realized I knew about the theft. He swallowed nervously and asked what ring I was talking about. I told him I wanted the sapphire, the ring belonging to Helen Lindsay, the ring he claimed he took to be resized, the ring he gave to his mistress. The office door swung open. Kira stepped into the room holding a stack of files. She started to remind Doug about their morning sales meeting. Then she saw me standing by the desk. She stopped, dead in her tracks. The 3 of us stood frozen in the pristine glass office. I watched Doug look at Kira. Then Doug pointed a shaking finger at the door. He ordered Kira to get out of his office right now. His voice was freezing cold. There were no sweet nicknames. He did not sound like a loving partner. He sounded exactly like an angry boss shouting at a massive liability. Kira saw the truth in his eyes for the very first time. She was not his great romance. She was a red line on a failing balance sheet. Doug was desperately trying to calculate his losses, and she was dragging him under. Kira clutched her files to her chest and backed out of the room. I watched her walk away. I expected to feel a massive surge of triumph. Instead, I only felt a heavy wave of pity. She was 34 years old. She truly believed she had found love with a powerful man, and she had just been swatted out of the room like a nuisance. I turned back to Doug. I told him to sign the papers so we could finally be done with each other. I gathered my documents, slid them into the folder, and walked out. My red boots clicked loudly across the showroom tile. The employees watched me leave. I did not care what they thought. I only cared that I finally knew the truth. I drove my car straight to Kira's apartment complex that same afternoon. I did not call ahead. I simply walked up the stairs and knocked on her front door. She opened the wood slowly. Her eyes were red and swollen. Her dark mascara was smudged beneath her lower lashes. She was still wearing the black blazer from the dealership. The tiny brown dog from the photograph trotted out and barked at my shoes. Its little tail wagged happily. The animal was just as small as it looked in the picture. I looked down at the dog and told Kira I was not there to talk about my husband. She crossed her arms defensively and asked why I was standing on her porch. I pointed to her right hand. I told her I was there for the sapphire ring. Kira looked down at her fingers. She touched the dark blue stone and the worn silver setting. She told me Doug had bought it for her at an estate sale. I shook my head. I told her Doug was a liar. I explained that the ring belonged to my mother. I told Kira my mother had worn that exact band for 35 years. She gave it to me the night she passed away. I told her Doug had stolen it straight from my jewelry box 2 months ago. I watched her face change. The defensive posture vanished entirely. The fear melted away. A quiet devastation took over her features. She stared at the ring on her hand and finally understood the reality of her situation. If the man lied about an antique ring, he lied about absolutely everything. He lied when he said his marriage was dead. He lied when he promised to leave his wife. He lied when he called her the only woman he loved. Kira slowly slid the silver band off her finger. She reached out and placed the ring into the palm of my hand. Her voice shook as she tried to speak. She started to say what he had told her. I cut her off gently. I told her I already knew exactly what he said. I explained that he said the exact same things to me. He just used different words for different women. It was the exact same man. Kira looked up at me. She was no longer looking at the angry wife. She was looking at another woman standing in the wreckage of a collapsed life. I closed my fingers around the cold metal. I told her I gave him 19 years of my life. I told her she gave him 7 months. I said the result was exactly the same for both of us. Kira slowly sank down onto the threshold of her doorway. The little brown dog jumped into her lap. She sat in complete silence. I stood on the porch and realized I did not need to say another word. I did not need to teach her a lesson or demand an apology. I held my mother's ring tightly in my fist. That was more than enough. I turned around and walked down the concrete stairs. Just as I reached the bottom step, I heard her voice float down through the damp air. She whispered that she truly did not know about the ring. I did not turn around, but I nodded my head just enough so she could see I heard her. 3 months passed. The Portland rain fell steadily against the kitchen window on a quiet Thursday morning. I stood at the counter and poured exactly 1 cup of dark roast coffee. It had taken me 90 days to unlearn the habit of pouring 2. Sage walked down the stairs with her backpack slung over her shoulder. Her hair was pulled back into a high ponytail. She grabbed a granola bar from the pantry and announced she was leaving for school. I told her a granola bar was not a real breakfast. She smiled slightly and told me that sounded exactly like something a mother would say. The front door closed behind her. My phone vibrated against the counter. A text message from Bess illuminated the screen. The settlement was completely finalized. He had signed every single document. I read the words twice. I did not open a bottle of champagne. I did not call anyone to celebrate. I simply looked down at my hands. My left hand was entirely bare. My right hand wore a dark blue sapphire set in worn silver. The initials of Helen Lindsay rested safely against my skin. It was not the ring of a wife. It was the ring of a mother. I grabbed my keys and drove to work. The morning rain was the gentle kind that people in this city never bothered using umbrellas for. I pulled into the credit union parking lot and walked up to the glass doors. I looked at the brand new brass nameplate Bess had ordered for me last week. I had not asked her to do it, but she knew exactly what I needed. The gold letters read, Joanne Lindsay, Branch Manager. I had lost 19 years of my life. I had lost a marriage and a smile I would never see again. I had lost a foundation of trust that could never be rebuilt. But I had taken back my real name. I had recovered my mother's ring, and I was wearing my red leather boots. I unlocked the front doors and turned on the lobby lights. I booted up my computer terminal. A new day had officially started. The first customer of the morning walked up to my desk. I looked up and smiled. It was a professional, steady smile. It was not blindingly bright or overly eager. It was the quiet smile of a woman who finally knew exactly who she was. I folded my hands over my desk and asked how I could help them today. I sat across from my attorney and my best friend the following Wednesday morning. The heavy mahogany desk felt different today. I did not want a war anymore. I outlined my new terms to Sharon. I wanted a clean extraction. I asked for the house to be refinanced solely under my name. I requested a fair split of the dealership equity. I wanted joint custody so Sage could decide exactly when she wanted to see her father. I had one strictly non-negotiable demand. I wanted the blue sapphire ring belonging to my mother returned to my right hand. Sharon adjusted her glasses and explained that the ring was legally considered separate property. She said Doug had absolutely no right to take a family heirloom. I told her I knew the law. The ring was currently sitting on the right hand of Kira Novak, and I wanted it back. Bess crossed her arms tightly over her chest. She stared at me in absolute frustration. She reminded me that I could take so much more from him. She pointed to the thick folder of financial evidence and the fraudulent mortgage application. She wanted me to burn his reputation to the ground. I looked my friend directly in the eyes. I told her I refused to spend the next 2 years of my life living inside the mind of Doug Pratt. I wanted to be completely done with him. Bess sat in silence for a long time. Finally, she uncrossed her arms. She told me to at least let him know I held the power to destroy him. She wanted me to show him the loaded weapon and then choose to walk away. She said that was what true power looked like. I nodded. That was exactly what I planned to do. I walked through the double doors of the main Ford dealership at 9 a.m. on the following Monday. It was the very first time in 19 years I had entered the building without attending a company holiday party or picking up my husband. The showroom smelled intensely of new plastic and harsh carpet cleaner. The sales floor fell quiet as I walked past the reception desk. I was wearing a pair of bright red leather boots. Doug had called them an interesting choice back in 2017. I had shoved them into the back of my closet ever since. This morning, they were the only shoes that felt right. Doug sat behind the glass walls of his corner office. I opened his door and stepped inside. He looked up from his computer. His face shifted rapidly. He was calculating the damage. I did not sit down. I opened my folder and placed 3 items perfectly flat on his desk. First, I laid down the financial report. I had highlighted the $47,000 in hidden charges and the blocked $200,000 mortgage application. Second, I placed the corporate employee handbook on the wood surface, a yellow sticky note marked page 47. Third, I set down the printed photograph of Kira and her nightstand. The blue glass cologne bottle sat next to a book. I placed the text message he had sent me 4 months ago right beside it, the message where he claimed the cologne was a free sample. I told him he would receive the final settlement agreement this afternoon. I gave him exactly 7 days to sign the papers. I promised that if he signed these 3 items would stay hidden inside my folder forever. He told me I did not need to threaten him. I leaned forward. I told him the corporate office would receive the handbook violation, along with his human resources file. I mentioned the phrase franchise review. All the color drained from his face. I told him the bank would receive a formal fraud report regarding the forged signature on the mortgage application. Doug pressed his hands flat against the desk. I told him I did not even need to mention the local community. A heavy silence filled the office. Doug finally asked how much money I wanted. I told him I wanted the house. I wanted my fair share. I wanted Sage to make her own choices. And I wanted the sapphire ring. Doug flinched hard. He swallowed nervously and asked what ring I was talking about. I told him I wanted the sapphire, the ring belonging to Helen Lindsay, the ring he claimed he took to resize, the ring he gave to his mistress. The office door opened. Kira stepped into the room holding a stack of files. She saw me standing by the desk and stopped dead in her tracks. Doug pointed a shaking finger at the door. He ordered Kira to get out of his office right now. His voice was freezing cold. There were no sweet nicknames. He sounded exactly like an angry boss shouting at a massive liability. Kira saw the truth in his eyes. She was a red line on a failing balance sheet. She clutched her files and backed out of the room. I watched her walk away. I only felt a heavy wave of pity. She was 34 years old, and she had just been swatted out of the room like a nuisance. I told Doug to sign the papers. I gathered my documents and walked out. My red boots clicked loudly across the showroom tile. I drove my car straight to the apartment complex of his mistress that same afternoon. I knocked on her front door. She opened the wood slowly. Her eyes were red. The tiny brown dog from the photograph trotted out and barked at my shoes. I pointed to her right hand. I told her I was there for the sapphire ring. Kira touched the dark blue stone. She told me Doug had bought it for her at an estate sale. I shook my head. I told her Doug was a liar. I explained that the ring belonged to my mother. She gave it to me the night she passed away. Doug had stolen it from my jewelry box 2 months ago. A quiet devastation took over her features. If the man lied about an antique ring, he lied about absolutely everything. Kira slowly slid the silver band off her finger. She placed the ring into the palm of my hand. Her voice shook as she started to say what he had told her. I cut her off gently. I told her he said the exact same things to me. Kira slowly sank down onto the threshold of her doorway. The little dog jumped into her lap. I closed my fingers around the cold metal. I did not need to say another word. I turned around and walked down the concrete stairs. I heard her whisper that she truly did not know about the ring. I nodded my head just enough so she could see. 3 months passed. The Portland rain fell steadily on a quiet Thursday morning. I stood at the kitchen counter and poured exactly 1 cup of dark roast coffee. Sage walked down the stairs. She grabbed a granola bar and announced she was leaving for school. I told her a granola bar was not a real breakfast. She smiled slightly, and the front door closed behind her. My phone vibrated. A text message from Bess illuminated the screen. The settlement was completely finalized. He had signed every single document. I looked down at my hands. My left hand was entirely bare. My right hand wore a dark blue sapphire set in worn silver. I drove to work. I pulled into the credit union parking lot and walked up to the glass doors. I looked at the brand new brass nameplate Bess had ordered for me. The gold letters read Joanne Lindsay Branch Manager. I had taken back my real name. I had recovered the ring belonging to my mother, and I was wearing my red leather boots. I unlocked the front doors and turned on the lobby lights. A new day had officially started. The first customer of the morning walked up to my desk. She carried a leather purse tightly against her chest. Her eyes darted toward the glass doors before she sat down. Her left thumb rubbed frantically against a thin gold wedding band. I recognized the nervous friction immediately. I had spent 19 years wearing a deep groove into my own finger the exact same way. She introduced herself as Clara. Her voice stayed barely above a whisper. She asked if she could open a private checking account. She explained that her husband managed all their money and handled all the mail. She swallowed hard and said she had found an unfamiliar hotel receipt in his coat pocket. She stared at my desk and admitted she did not know what to do next. I did not offer her a sad smile or a sympathetic nod. Pity was the absolute last thing a woman needed when the floor fell out from under her life. I pulled a blank white notepad from my top drawer and placed it squarely in the center of the desk. I handed her my favorite black pen. I told Clara the very first step was not confronting him or packing a suitcase in the middle of the night. The first step was finding the raw numbers. I told her to look at the bank statements and the credit card bills without any emotion attached to them. I explained that men who lied easily with their mouths almost always told the absolute truth with their wallets. She took the pen. Her hands shook against the wood surface. She confessed she was terrified because she had never been anything other than his wife. She said she did not even know what kind of music she liked anymore because she only listened to his favorite radio stations in the car. I leaned back in my chair and looked at my right hand. The dark blue sapphire caught the bright overhead light. I thought about the woman who used to blindly pour 2 cups of coffee every single morning. I thought about the heavy folders of evidence, the quiet rain on my windshield, and the red leather boots I now wore proudly almost every single day. I pointed to the polished brass nameplate sitting on the edge of my desk. I told Clara I lost my own name for nearly 2 decades. I told her the hardest part of walking away was not dividing the retirement accounts or selling the beautiful family house. The truly difficult part was standing in an empty bathroom and introducing yourself to the mirror all over again. I tapped the blank paper. I told her to write down her full maiden name at the very top of the page. She slowly wrote the letters. The trembling in her hand began to fade. I told her she was going to build a new foundation entirely out of cold, hard facts. I promised her that the blinding fear would eventually burn away and leave something incredibly solid behind. Clara looked up from the notepad. The terrified look in her eyes had cracked just a fraction. A tiny spark of recognition shone clearly through her heavy grief. She sat up a little straighter in the leather guest chair. She took a deep breath and began to write down her financial goals. I process dozens of applications every single week. I watch women walk through my glass doors carrying the heavy weight of broken promises and lost identities. Some of them are just starting to uncover the hidden bank transfers and the late-night text messages. Some of them are finally taking off their wedding rings and looking for a safe place to put their own money. We all have that one specific thing we locked away in a dark closet or a dusty jewelry box to make ourselves smaller for someone else. We silence our own voices just to keep the peace in a house that no longer feels like home. For me, it was a pair of bright red boots and my mother's antique ring. I want to know about your hidden pieces. What is the one thing you put away to make someone else comfortable? Tell me what it is in the comments below and tell me exactly what it will take for you to finally wear it again.